Hello, football fans. Welcome in on this Monday, October 14th, 2024. We have an amazing show planned today. Great weekend of college football, great weekend of NFL football. Week 6 ends tonight with the Jets and the Bills, a divisional game that we saw last year that ended in heartbreak for Jets fans because they lost Aaron Rodgers. And I guess you could say a little bit of happiness because they found the way to win with Zach Wilson. But we know that season did not end up going how Jets fans hoped it would go. Feels like poetic justice. Might get a little more of that tonight. I will preview the game at the end of our show. But let's start here. Lamar Jackson is on pace for his third MVP award, and I've been critical of Lamar in the past because of his postseason play, because he does not play in the postseason the way that he does in the regular season. That's undeniable. He loses a little bit of that downfield. His ability to throw the ball downfield, does not play nearly as confident. Looks like he's constantly trying to hit a home run or be the hero or hit a grand slam. Is a little more reluctant to use his legs. He just does not play like himself. But other than that, I've said on this show, and I said it last week, I think Lamar Jackson is the best regular season quarterback in the NFL. And there's nobody I would rather have in the regular season under center than Lamar Jackson. Let's give it a little bit of context here. Over the weekend, the Commanders faced off against the Ravens, and what I told you last week was going to be the game that I was paying attention to the most. It ended up proving to be very exciting. I think in the end, the box score and the final score didn't reflect how far apart that game was because it felt like it was closest to the end, and I think Jaden Daniels did a great job, but in the end, I think Lamar and that rushing attack ended up being the difference. So I'm going to cut straight to the box score here. Lamar Jackson, as usual, did damage with both his arm and his legs. He completed 20 of 26 passes for 323 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. He added 40 more rushing yards to his career total on 11 carries. He now ranks second in total quarterback rushing yards all time. He's about 600 behind Michael Vick right now. He'll either hit that at the end of the season or at the beginning of next season, but he is on pace to become, if he's not already, the greatest rushing quarterback of all time. I think Lamar Jackson already holds that title in my opinion. He will officially hold it once he passes Mike Vick in the next 8 months or maybe at the start of next season. Lamar also had he was in sync early with Zay Flowers, who is slowly but surely becoming wide receiver one and has proven to be a great wide receiver draft pick for the Baltimore Ravens, who had not had the best luck drafting guys. The guys that they drafted to be Lamar's pass catchers haven't been the best outside of Mark Andrews, who's been a staple of that offense for years. Finally feels like they got it right with Zay Flowers. They were in sync. They tallied 9 catches and a career-high 132 yards in the first half between Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson. He then found Mark Andrews for a touchdown just before halftime to put the Ravens up 17-10. Then they had that blocked kick. Commanders were trying to score there at the end, trying to win the field position battle, if you will. And I think Jaden Daniels played really well. In the end, though, you learned who's in charge around here, and you learned why Lamar Jackson truly is just an unstoppable force in football in the regular season. And I'm starting to wonder, I heard this comparison last week, and I think it's super accurate the more and more I think about it. As great as Lamar Jackson is playing right now in the regular season, I can't help but wonder, is Lamar Jackson like 2018, 2019 James Harden? Like, is he an amazing, undeniable MVP, offensive talent? There's nobody you would rather have with the ball in their hands kind of a guy in the regular season, and then all of a sudden in the postseason, he's a shell of himself. That is what I hope is not going to happen to Lamar Jackson in the postseason, but it kind of feels like that could end up being our reality because 20 of 26 passing, looked amazing with his arm, obviously gets it done with his legs, had another 40 rushing yards, has become the greatest rushing quarterback of all time, but also gets better as a passer every single year, which I think is a really underrated storyline when it comes to Lamar, and he deserves our credit there. But is it going to carry on over into the postseason? I think that's a question that everybody has. That's a question that I have, that I am asking, and I think rightfully so, because Lamar's postseason performances and the way that he collapses, I understand that last year he did have a postseason win, which is big time, and he kind of got over the hurdle, but still, Lamar collapsing the way he did against that Kansas City Chiefs team last year in the postseason is something that I can't wipe from my memory. And week 1, watching Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson get stifled again by that Spags-led Kansas City Chiefs defense, it's kind of hard for me to not think about it a little bit when I see how the Ravens are dominating literally every other team in the NFL except the Kansas City Chiefs week 1. A Kansas City Chiefs team whose offense is nowhere near 100%, nor are they playing their best football, nor is Mahomes playing his best football. If they couldn't beat that Chiefs team and that defense literally bullied them the way that they did week 1, how do I feel about Lamar going forward? I don't know, but I think Lamar Jackson absolutely deserves his third MVP. Another thing here that I think will be a part of the conversation is people will be reluctant to say Lamar Jackson is the MVP at the end of the year because they'll say, what about his postseason success? It's going to look like that like the Nikola Jokic argument where they said, yeah, he's a great regular season player, but since he's not getting it done in the postseason, we're going to give it to somebody else because he doesn't deserve to have his third MVP award. People are going to take the Jokic route as to justify why they don't want to give Lamar his third MVP, and that's wrong. Lamar will deserve his third MVP at the end of this year, even if he has another postseason clunker. I think everybody the same year that they gave the MVP to Joel Embiid instead of Nikola Jokic, the writers and the voters felt kind of stupid, and so did fans because they were like, you know what, he was the best player this year and he deserved the MVP and we should have given it to him. I don't want to have that same kind of regret or feeling if Lamar Jackson has an amazing postseason, but people don't give him his regular season MVP just because they say, oh, you know what? He's not a good postseason player, so he doesn't deserve MVP. You can't give MVP to someone who doesn't get it done in the postseason. I would give Lamar Jackson his third MVP. Obviously, still plenty of time left in the season, but he's on pace for it, and I don't think anyone will stop him or catch him either. Although Sam Darnold, who's probably top 3 right now at MVP odds, was on a bye week. I don't think he'll win it. I'm saying that a little bit sarcastically, even though I do love Sam Darnold and the kind of numbers and the performances that he's putting up this year, but I don't think he'll end up being the guy ultimately that wins the award. I want to move on here. So Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars have dropped to 1-5 now after an amazing performance from Caleb Williams and the Bears were firing on all cylinders in London, and they were playing their best football. That was the most complete football game the Bears have played this season, and they played it overseas in London. Forget the weather, forget the time change. They played great, and Caleb Williams really came into his own with 4 touchdowns, all coming through the air, had some nice rushing plays as well, not designed runs, just those Caleb Williams USC-esque kind of plays where pocket breaks down, protection breaks down, there's nothing downfield, or he doesn't want to risk throwing the ball downfield into danger, and so he takes it with his own legs and he makes a big play on the ground. It felt like Caleb Williams felt comfortable, and it felt like Shane Waldron and him have kind of found their path, and they're getting comfortable with each other, and I love the play calling, and I think they were great. But now Trevor Lawrence starts the season 1-5. And it's weird because if you would have asked me before the season, I would have said Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence are a top 10 head coach quarterback combination in the NFL, maybe even 7 or 8. But obviously, it's hard for me to kind of justify that now with a 1-5 start to the season. Now, I will say, important stat, no quarterback has dealt with more drops since 2021 than Trevor Lawrence. But there's something about what I watched yesterday. Like, people always say, isn't it annoying when you know someone who's not just wrong, but they're loud and wrong, or they're confident and wrong? Trevor Lawrence's play yesterday felt confident and wrong when he was playing against the Chicago Bears in London, because Trevor Lawrence would uncork these throws like straight down the middle that you were like, man, that's an absolute bullet into double coverage, and it got picked off. Trevor Lawrence has not played his best football in several years now, and he was a number 1 overall draft pick, so there is some tendency, and I admit this as the media, where we give those guys, including him, a little more leeway. But at a certain extent and at a certain point, we've got to be honest about who Trevor Lawrence is as an NFL quarterback. I thought he might have become an elite quarterback a couple years ago, and now I feel like he's on the border of just being a mediocre quarterback. Trevor Lawrence has a lower career completion percentage than Daniel Jones. That is not to compliment Daniel Jones. If anything, that's an indictment on both of them. Neither one is a particularly good starting quarterback in the NFL. I would take Trevor Lawrence over Daniel Jones in a heartbeat, but by the same token, you look at some of these stats, and I don't feel great about the point that they are at in either of their careers right now. And I tweeted this out yesterday, and I had some people agree with me, and I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm wrong when I say this. Paying a quarterback or paying a player does not make him better. And I think that's what Daniel Jones, I think that's what Trevor Lawrence, I think that's what Deshaun Watson has proven over the last several months. That is who they are at this point. They are guys who we ended up paying way too much money to and gave too much credit, and they cannot do more with less. Trevor Lawrence was paid this offseason a king's ransom, $55 million a year, and for what? We kind of knew what Trevor Lawrence was at the end of last season. We gave him what we thought was going to be a top-tier wide receiver 1 in Calvin Ridley. Still didn't look good then. And now, I mean, here's a stat about Daniel Jones, kind of leaking 2 stories here into one. Daniel Jones at home over the past 2 seasons for the Giants is 0-5 with a 57.9 rating, 9 turnovers, 0 touchdown passes or runs, 3.97 yards per dropback. The Giants have scored 6.2 points per game with 1 offensive touchdown and 3 pick sixes by Jones in those 5 games. Paying a player does not make him better. Trevor Lawrence has proved that. Daniel Jones has proved that. Deshaun Watson has proved that. Russell Wilson proved that at the end of his career, and it's the reason why I think Russell Wilson will end up losing first ballot Hall of Fame votes because the ending of his career has been so ugly. And I know I'm kind of looping a group of guys into this, but when guys show you who they are, believe them. That's what the rookie contract is for. The rookie contract for a guy like a Trevor Lawrence or a Deshaun Watson is high. And Deshaun Watson, I think everybody would agree, at the time when he was coming up at the end of his contract in Houston, deserved the money that he was going to get. Trevor Lawrence, I didn't feel 100% comfortable when I saw the news come in. I'll never forget it. It was in the offseason, and I was at Mass when all of a sudden I see Trevor Lawrence has been paid his $250 million contract, the $55 million per year. And as someone who was a fan of Trevor Lawrence when he was at Clemson, I was like, I don't feel 100% confident with that decision. I didn't feel good about it. Like, when you pay someone like a Justin Herbert or a Joe Burrow, I'm like, man, I'm all in. You got me. You absolutely had to make that decision. It feels like a foregone conclusion months before it happens. But when it happened to Trevor Lawrence and when I saw Daniel Jones get paid the amount that he got paid, I hesitate as someone who loves quarterbacks and loves great quarterback play because you're asking guys who weren't able to achieve the ultimate success or get anywhere near it with all the help around them when they were making very little money. And now you're giving them a king's ransom and you're asking them to do more with less when they couldn't do more with more. And that's the point that I feel like I'm at with Trevor Lawrence. He's a bad quarterback right now. He's not playing well. And I understand that people are going to point to the drops and point to Gabe Davis's poor performances and say Gabe Davis can only catch touchdowns against the Patriots. Trevor Lawrence isn't playing good right now, and there's got to be a change. I don't know if it's head coaching. I don't know if it's the entire organization as a whole, but you're locked in with Trevor Lawrence right now for a few years, so you better figure it out. Okay, this morning, breaking, Mike McDaniel said, I expect Tua to play football in 2024. The Dolphins are currently back from their bye week, and the potential return of quarterback Tua Tagovailoa was the subject of the first question asked to head coach Mike McDaniel this morning at his press conference. Tua has missed 3 games after suffering a concussion in week 2 and will become eligible to be a designated for return from injury reserve after this week's game against the Colts. McDaniel said, all the word Tua has continued to be positive, and he expects the quarterback to play again this season, but the coach was non-committal about Tua practicing this week. Look, I'm not going to even read to you the quote. This is, I think, the problem with the NFL news cycle, and I fall victim to it all the time. We are so quick on a week in and week out basis, especially on an overreaction Monday like this, to jump to conclusions about teams and about what's going on and players, and we move on from injuries. But we can't forget about what Tua was like 3 weeks ago. The world, and I think the Dolphins, in a way, want you to forget that Tua, when he has been hit, looks like he's having a stroke on the field. There is no way to put that mildly or to sugarcoat it in any way, shape, or form. Tua, when he gets hit, it is one of the scariest feelings as a football fan in general. I am from Miami. I'm not a Dolphins fan, but when you see Tua get hit, you feel like you just saw something you weren't supposed to see. The fencing hands, the gestures, the hands, the temporarily being out of it in the way that Tua has been. There's a reason why football fans and former teammates of Tua and close friends have been hesitant surrounding Tua and his injury past. Tua should not be on a football field playing quarterback in the NFL under center for another several weeks. And if they decide to bring him back after this Colts game, it's going to be an indictment on the franchise. And I think Mike McDaniel is a great offensive mind because of what I've seen, regardless of the Tua situation. I'm not sure if he's a great head coach in general in terms of keeping everybody on the same page. The way the team seems to be one-sided is really bothersome. I think he's a great offensive mind. Like I said, came from that Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. I give him a lot more credit and credence than most people do. But the handling of this Tua situation is going to be looked at closely by me and I assume by other football fans. And if you march Tua back out there and Mike McDaniel says in this press conference this morning, Tua will be designated to potentially return in a few weeks. He's going to play football again in 2024. And Tua marches back out there, and after a few weeks gets hit again, and we're having the same conversation again, the NFL is going to worry. And the NFL is going to look at the Miami Dolphins and say, what are you doing? Because the Dolphins seem like they are incompetent from a football operations perspective and irresponsible, quite frankly, letting Tua walk and march back out onto that field knowing his past. Tua has had multiple instances in prime time getting hit, getting the wind knocked out of him, seemingly losing his equilibrium, not being able to get back onto his own 2 feet without help. The fencing hands, it's a bad look. And the Dolphins need to figure out who they are as a football team, who they are as an organization, what their identity is, because quite frankly, as a football fan, strictly from an X's and O's point of view, I don't know what that is, but it cannot be we're relying on Tua to come back and be just fine. And I will say, we saw the tweet last week from Tyreek Hill that apparently his Twitter account was put under review for. Somebody tweeted out, just to show how confident they are in Tua, they should have Tua run a designed quarterback run play, his first play back, just to show he's all right. Tyreek Hill retweeted that or quote tweeted that and said, who's going to call the next play? Which means either Tyreek Hill was insinuating Mike McDaniel's going to get fired because he won't be calling plays if he calls for Tua's first play back a designed quarterback run, or he was insinuating Tua, who is calling the plays in the huddle, will not be able to for whatever reason. You can say it was distasteful. I think to a certain extent it was. I know Tyreek Hill is a joking personality, and we know the kind of person that Tyreek Hill is. I don't think he was wishing anything bad upon his own teammate. But if your team's star is the first one to point out, hey, if we run a designed quarterback run with Tua under center, who's going to call the next play because he's not going to be the one to do it, or Mike McDaniel won't be the one to do it, that is a serious indictment on the Miami Dolphins and their football operations, especially when you consider that Mike McDaniel was saying at a press conference this Monday morning, yeah, Tua was going to be fine to play football again in 2024. It's irresponsible, it looks incompetent, and it reeks of the Miami Dolphins just lacking self-awareness in regards to their own building, which is shameful. Speaking of shameful, and I didn't intend for that to be the toss, but looks like it's going to be. I think Deshaun Watson might go down in history as the worst trade of all time across any sport, across any league, because what we're seeing right now, the Browns have become the first team in 10 years to score under 20 points in each of their first 6 games. Cleveland has now scored once in its last 29 drives. I think of those stats as a football fan, and I'm like, man, we think the Panthers are bad. Look at how bad this Cleveland Browns team is. The Cleveland Browns are literally circling the drain right now. And I've joked around, every time the Browns play in a game, it feels like you're watching the Toilet Bowl instead of the Super Bowl. They are competing right now to be one of the top 3 worst teams in the NFL. They're competing for bottom. They're competing for the last place. This team is terrible. And you know what? I take that back. This team is so well built, but is playing terrible because they have zero confidence in the guy under center. The team's not getting lost. The locker room is not lost because of head coach Kevin Stefanski. They're lost because they realize that they paid a quarterback $230 million fully guaranteed who cannot provide them with good quarterback play. So the New York Times and The Athletic, who I guess they've now merged, wrote an article about what a trade scenario would look like after this season. I'm not going to even go over that because to me, people are now starting to speculate, what can you get for a Deshaun Watson trade because you have to move off him. You would have to give Deshaun Watson and also give up picks and whatever trade would go down if you're the Cleveland Browns. No one is going to take on Deshaun Watson, the player, the personality, the baggage, the past, or the contract in any sort of trade in the NFL if you have a GM with 2 brain cells. Nobody's going to trade for Deshaun Watson. Nobody wants that in their locker room. Nobody wants, I'm not going to go over it again. There is no element of Deshaun Watson's game or of his personality or who he is that you would want in your NFL building now midseason or at the end of the year to start off. Deshaun Watson is not a good quarterback. Based on what we've seen, you could come to the conclusion and the judgment that Deshaun Watson might not be a good person and it's not a good contract. So financially, on the field, or in your locker room, personally, it doesn't make any sense. So with that being said, last season, everybody was shocked when the Broncos decided we're going to take a $53 million cap hit in 2024 to have Russell Wilson not on our roster because they didn't feel that Russell Wilson was the right fit. The Cleveland Browns might break NFL history less than a year later when they have to cut Deshaun Watson, and his cap hit ends up being $172 million if they cut him before June 1st or $118 million if they cut him after June 1st. Whatever the case may be, I don't think Deshaun Watson can be traded for. I don't think there's a market for him. The Patriots wouldn't take him on. The Panthers wouldn't take him on. Nobody's going to touch that contract or the player right now with the way he's playing. The reason Deshaun Watson was able to fetch as much as he did from a dysfunctional Cleveland Browns organization, those 3 first-round picks and the contract that he got, was because the Browns were willing to put the baggage behind him and behind them and just overlook it if they were getting a top 3 to top 5 to top 10 quarterback in the NFL. They are getting a bottom 3 quarterback, a bottom 3 starting quarterback in the NFL right now. So they are not willing to put up with it, and no one else is either. So when I look at that, and I look at the numbers, since people want to be so analytics-based when it comes to this conversation, the Deshaun Watson scenario is followed by the cap hits. If he stays on the roster in 2025, the cap hit is $72 million. The cut pre-June 1st is $172 million. The cut post-June 1st is $118 million. If he's traded pre-June 1st, not going to happen, it's $80 million. If he's traded post-June 1st, it's $26 million. Now, I do see a lot of speculation about Deshaun Watson and why he's playing poorly, or whether it's a mental thing, or an on-field thing, or an X's and O's thing, or a decision-making thing. Excuse me. I'm going to be a little bit cynical here and say I don't care. I don't care what the problem with Deshaun Watson is. I don't care if it's a mental thing. I don't care if he feels like he's not confident under center. I don't care if he's not making good decisions. There are players who have been through more, who are better people, who have performed more poorly, and we're still critical of them. Dak Prescott is not playing great football, and we think he's a great person, but we dog on Dak Prescott all the time, myself included, when he deserves it and he has a poor performance like he did yesterday. Deshaun Watson, who is not nearly the same person off the football field that Dak Prescott is playing worse football than Dak Prescott has ever played, and we're supposed to take it easy on him? I don't see that. I cannot bring myself to take it easy when it comes to Deshaun Watson. I don't think he deserves it, quite frankly, and that's the last I'll say on that. Okay, so we've got a couple headlines here. A disaster in Dallas. Jerry Jones says he's not considering a coaching change after the first few weeks of the season. When it comes to Mike McCarthy, if you get blown out almost 50-9, you better consider a coaching change. And I think everybody deserves blame in Dallas. It's not one person. The play calling from Mike McCarthy is terrible. He criticized Kellen Moore about a year and a half ago by saying we were throwing the ball too much and we weren't running the ball enough. And now currently this Dallas Cowboys team with Mike McCarthy as their play caller has thrown the ball more and at a higher rate than they ever did with Kellen Moore. So it's hypocritical, if nothing else. Dak Prescott made poor decisions yesterday. He didn't even see the DB when he threw the pick in the corner of the end zone to Branch in the red zone. That was a bad decision, a bad play. Dak Prescott showed that he lacked self-awareness or any sort of awareness on that play. See, this team is too heavily predicated on CeeDee Lamb. And in the offseason, everybody laughed when I said this team is too... I said in the offseason, the Cowboys offensively, or the Cowboys in general, this upcoming season are going to be CeeDee Lamb and CeeDee Lamb. And people got mad. People scoffed. People said, oh, you're just a Cowboys hater. I told you that offensive line was considerably weaker going into this year than they had ever previously been. And Dak Prescott has always had the benefit of having a really solid offensive line. This would be the first year he didn't. I told you they did not have a run game this year. They would not be able to establish it. And Zeke was not going to resurrect his career and the old version of Zeke and start averaging 4.5 or 5 yards per carry this season. He is averaging one of the least amount of yards per carry this season. I want to say it's 2 or 3. And you cannot establish a run game with Zeke or any running back if you're only rushing for 2.5 yards per carry. That's what the Dallas Cowboys are right now with Dak under center. So when you don't have a threat of the run game, you are being forced to throw the ball more than ever. And Dak Prescott, when he's forced to throw more than ever, is going to make mistakes. He is going to throw picks. He is going to make bad decisions. And he did. And Branch picked him off. And that offense was putrid yesterday. And even though Turpin had some amazing plays, and it seems like they're trying to function offensively without Brandon Cooks, their wide receiver too, that Dallas Cowboys team is crumbling. And I told you it would in the offseason because I didn't have faith in Jerry Jones. I didn't have faith in their run game or their ability to establish a run game. I told you the offense was too heavily predicated on CeeDee Lamb and nothing else. And you cannot force Dak to become Patrick Mahomes because that's not what he is. He's not going to be the most effective dink and dunk quarterback the way that Mahomes is in the postseason. He is not that. So for me to even mention the two in the same sentence is honestly an insult to Dak Prescott. And I also told you this. And this one is one that people have not talked about nearly enough, that I've gotten a lot of pushback on whenever I've said it, but it is simply the reality. Forget Dak. Micah Parsons is a good pass rusher. But for people to say that Micah Parsons is a great pass rusher is to ignore who Micah Parsons has looked like and what Micah Parsons looks like in the postseason against teams that have big physical offensive lines. This was the worst nightmare for Micah Parsons and this Dallas Cowboys defense because it showed you and it pointed out the blaring flaws in this Dallas Cowboys pass rush. Micah Parsons is a little smaller than I would like him to be. And every time I say that, I get scoffs, I get pushback. You see it. When Micah Parsons has to go against, these great offensive lines who can bully a pass rush if they're mediocre or anything but good, you see that Micah struggles. And this is not the first time that Micah has struggled, and Micah has had a quiet season. Micah cannot pin his ears back this season and just get after the quarterback because he is dealing with a team that usually the opposing offense now, because Dallas can't establish a run and they can't stop the run, that means the other team is going to score, they're going to get the lead early, and they're going to run at the clock, which means Micah Parsons cannot just pin his ears back and go after the quarterback if there's a balanced run attack, which Micah Parsons is not good against anyway. He is a smaller player than I would like him to be, and for that reason, I would not pay Micah. I've said that. I would not pay him the amount that he's asking for. People scoffed at that, and I think that might be the best decision Jerry Jones made, one of the few of the offseason. I feel like there's so much here that I want to talk about. Let's start here because I'm running out of time. Mike Vrabel might be the next head coach for this team. Mike Vrabel, in my opinion, might be the next head coach for the New York Jets. It makes a lot of sense. Mike Vrabel was a winning head coach with the Titans, if nothing else. He had he had a regular season record of 54-45. He wasn't a bad head coach. He rallied the men. He rallied the boys. He kept their composure. He built a culture built on toughness. I think the Jets need that. For that reason, if I had to predict who will be the Jets' next head coach, it would be Mike Vrabel. I'm running out of time here, like I said. That is all for this week's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next Monday.